Okay, so we were just talking earlier in our check-in and looking for patterns that are in our check-in. And it seemed that one of the patterns, and someone called it like a wave or a portal, there's a shift in the way our work is being called, our participation is being called forth. That seems to be in a positive direction. It has its challenges. But I think specifically that I would like to highlight is that it seems that for years, most of our communities have been creating more metacognitive, metapsychological, meta models, putting a lot of pieces on the map, making distinctions, getting very complex. And it seems like we've done enough there's enough people that have done enough of that work that now we're designing practices that are more simple but powerful, that are like the deep patterns underneath all this complex thinking. And what's really exciting is not that that's being done, because many of us have already offered things that are more simple, but there seems to be a shift that people, now that it's attracting more people, like people seem to be wanting and ready and able and have enough background in a metacognitive way to understand that this is a powerful thing. So, for example, the Stoa is going in this direction. We got Maple, the monastic academy, with an ecology of practices that are very fundamental. I've got the pop-up school. Ria's been doing very, very disciplined, powerful, embodied, fundamental work for a long time. But I think, the question is it starting to draw in a different way? And so this is what we want to talk about. What is our sense of what's happening? What fuels it? Some of the parameters in your own work. So that would be what our question is, just a reflection on what is this shift? What do you think it's coming from, and how does it affect you and the people you work with?
Well, I love that you just named something that I had been sort of noticing, but it hadn't really come fully into my awareness about the way I'm approaching my own work right now. And just as you were speaking, Bonnie, I was thinking about just a tiny example. I've been writing haikus. So it was an absolute surprise to me. It just started recently. I love to write poems, and they're usually very long and very wordy. And haikus just started coming recently. And I'm just really enchanted by the simplicity and the depth in the simplicity of them. And so, so that feels significant in my own, there's like a moving for me towards more of an incantation, like a distilling of the essence of things. And then I'll also say, coincidentally, not coincidentally, I was looking at a video this morning of, I won't be able to pronounce her name. Maybe one of you knows her. She's a Chinese vlogger on YouTube called Li Ziqi, Liziqi, I think. She's got enormous subscriber base, and her videos are absolutely stunning, 20 minutes long, very little dialogue, and it's her doing provincial Chinese countryside lifestyle. So she's doing all the arts, and she's trying to, I was watching an interview with her because I've seen her videos and they're so beautiful, mesmerizing, like portraying this idyllic, very slow life in China. And so I watched an actual interview with her, and she was lovely. But she was just saying, like, I want to be masterful with the presentation of these ancient crafts so that they can be timeless, so that if anyone ever searches traditional embroidery and they find my video, I won't mislead. Like, I want to be masterful and accurate. The accuracy is really important. So I just offer those two pieces of art or culture that are arising for me. And then I'll finish on this. The other thing is I have all these complex essays I want to write, but the piece of work that's really coming forward right now is an offering of a book of these nature mandalas that I make. And I've been ignoring it for a long time, this project, because it felt too simple. It felt like really, it was like just my thing I do. It's like, it's not complex, and it's not metacognitive in any way at all. I pick up sticks and stones and leaves and arrange them. But that's the thing that's really wanting to come through. And I've been in a little bit of conflict about whether to put my energy into it because it's so easeful and so simple. But this is encouraging me that that's maybe on track. And I don't know why.
I pick it up because right before we were recording this, I was watching Bonnie's first lesson on indigeneity. And I think, Sky, why do we say why? It seems your form or format of relating with the land in a meaningful way. Yeah, and it's I notice myself to, and I have the luxury to do that, to not only go out in my garden in the weekends, but I can now and then a couple of hours somewhere in the week. And I'm like, there's always this little voice like, is this the important work? Is this important enough or something? Just getting some compost on the vegetable beds, and I'm like, yeah. Also thinking about what you, Bonnie, was saying in that video or in that workshop or course, whatever you call it. It's like, is there a way we can transmit some of these simple, basic things? I don't know. But I always have a sense of I need to keep it alive. Keep alive that people are growing food at home, that kind of thing. That's maybe not a big shift. Maybe, yeah, I don't know. Just what comes up. Pieces back in the middle.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you go. You sure?
I'll just go because it bounces off of Ria, and then I think having that come back to me, I think one of the things that's happening, or it's occurring to me right now, Vervaeke has one way to say it. Peter Lindbergh says seducing the culture. Vervaeke says stealing the culture. And I think this transmission thing is what's happening. It's like the internet sped up so much a certain way of being. And when you see that happening, you see how quickly learning about gardening, learning about the earth, using nature as symbols, how this is going to be swept away by the tides. And I think what we're saying is, as educators, we've been asking ourselves this question: how do you transmit that kind of stuff in this kind of technology? Because the race has gotten to be very fast. And so I think that's how many of us, like Peter opening that space to you at the STOA, really opened up a lot of that technology that you're doing. And I think the reason why it's successful, because over the years, you've been one of the most disciplined person in that technology. So you didn't get seduced by it's, I don't know if you could talk about how the medium might have been seductive to a certain way. But I think that's what we're talking about, that this counter movement to what the internet has amplified and what the challenge to use this technology to transmit this stuff, which is an interesting question, because like I said in that video, I don't know if you can transmit it without 30 years of working in the land. I don't know. That's an interesting question.
Do you want to respond, Ria, about being seduced by technology a certain way? No? Well, one way the transmission is happening in my own experience, in my observation, is certain teachers who never thought that certain aspects of yoga could never be taught online have been pushed to do so. And some of them have created enormous success in actually being able to have a very positive effect, globalize their audience, because these are global names. And once their stuff is now available also in Turkey, people start joining from all over the world. So for that of technology, I'm grateful. And I feel like it's inevitable that like how we are simplifying into our routines. For example, I am also a student at the pop-up school, Barney. I love that I can find you with your current best thinking and teachings in one place right now. At the same time, with the limited time I have as a mom and moving homes, etc., I can only do my somatic practice. That is primary. Move, go to the beach, do my movement practice on the mat, get to have a few quiet moments versus channeling my attention to what you're teaching, which even this is your miracle, because you are actually a teacher of embodiment, but in a very cognitive way. Like it's incredible how you can understand at a felt sense level and then transmit that understanding in words. But those words have never been put together like you are putting them together. So it takes a lot of rewiring, and like my whole energy actually goes to my prefrontal cortex when I'm studying with you, which is not something I'm so interested in doing all the time, or less and less, depending on the craziness of life. The crazier, the less of that I want in my life. So that makes me think that all the people who are dealing with this, we all live on the same earth with the information bombardment and the social and cultural and economic chaos that is exponentially increasing. People are feeling more and more anxious, less and less able to cope. Like we can bring the coping mechanisms into this conversation. I think it's a good tie, because it does come down to what keeps our culture from being able to grow up. But the point I was trying to make is as the need to find a way to calm down their nervous systems increases, people are going to look, they're going to type anxiety, how do you deal with anxiety into YouTube? And they're going to start finding the little videos that are movement practices that can actually create a difference in their lives. So I feel like creating the kind of content on our end that could be useful is meaningful at the moment. I'm grateful, like I said, I love that all your work is there. This is the upside of the technology we have. Like, yeah, that Chinese vlogger is creating these and they now live forever on the internet. Everything Stoa is creating is there from the beginning. And, you know, I don't know, comedians haven't really fully discovered. I've met some people here and they don't know of the Stoa, but when they learn about it, all that Stoa has done is there for them to, you know, even start from the beginning. I love that about the transmission. Hope that makes sense. I talked all over the place.
There's it's funny, I'm listening to you all, and the word that was coming up was death, and I was thinking how there's something about the muchness of the time we're living in, and I had that same sense as you just said, Eche, like this bombardment, like that our nervous systems, our evolutionary human selves are really not able very well to deal with such an onslaught of information and overwhelm and complexity and complicatedness, and especially at the speed at which it's coming at us. And I think it is an incredible speed that people are being asked to adapt and adjust to, even more so in the last 2 years, very much than even practically in their own lives. You know, from all the regulations that have come with COVID, and they keep switching, and now they're getting more and more intrusive into actual people's lives as to jobs and whether you can travel or not, et cetera, et cetera. So the amount of pivoting and adjusting that is required from people. You know, I'm reminded of my daughter saying just last week, I miss when the things I worried about were small things. I miss the time when I was worried about a particular dynamic with a girlfriend, or which pair of leggings I was going to choose, or, you know, like the small things, because the things that she now is fretting about are big things, which is the future and this planet and humanity, and are people good or are they not? Have people lost their minds or not? These are the things that are keeping her up at night. Are we going to make it through? Is light going to be stronger than the dark in the end? Like, that's the kind of stuff that she is now worrying about. And that's kind of how I started my reflection. I'm meandering a little bit. I hope I'll get to somewhere succinct. But this feeling of, you know, when you face death, suddenly life gets really stark. It's like, how, if I have one more day to live, what am I going to do? And then it, you know, it sort of all comes into the contours become sharper. And I feel like, in a way, with this onslaught that we're having, we have a choice, because it is incredibly complex. It's intensified. It's moving faster. We have a choice to fall back into what just feels incredibly overwhelming and complicated, and this quagmire of just literally kind of almost going numb and stuck and not knowing what to do. Or we can forge through that complexity into a simplicity, which is, okay, and now these are the simple actions I can take, which could be as simple as, there is so much going on that all I'm going to focus on is taking my next breath, and now my next breath, and now I'm going to do the dishes, and now I'm going to take the dog for a walk, and now I'm going to bring some soup to a neighbor who's sick. Like that simple next step. So in a way, I feel like we're at that choice point of either falling back and then kind of losing ourselves even more, or leaning forwards to a simplicity that literally is beyond and not before complexity, but of course borrows so much of the simplicity before the complexity. It's not like they're completely separate. It's just that you've gone through the that big framing of all the multiple perspectives you mentioned earlier, Bonnie. So you're holding all that kind of like it's here in this peripheral space, and then you doing the dishes is not separate from that, or you taking the compost to your vegetables, it's not separate from the complexity, it's actually with it, but this is what you're doing in this very next moment. And I think that's partly our way to make it through. I think otherwise we're just going to lose ourselves completely. So it becomes a matter of survival and also of thriving in the muchness of what's happening. I know that, you know, if I think back over 20, 30 years, I know that I've always had a bias to simple action. So for me, this is really not new whatsoever. And while I've enjoyed the more analytical, theoretical, cognitive spaces and kind of enjoy dancing in those, my driving question has always been, you know, the rubber hits the road when it comes to embodiment. And I don't mean embodiment as just the physical body. I mean embodiment as in walking the talk, how you show up in life, day in, day out, in all your relationships. And I've noticed that lately when I've read a book or heard a podcast of someone talking about that big framing and all that's going on, there's always the question, what and now and what do we do with all that? And there's almost nothing at the other end. You know, that the conclusions of these books are always a little bit disappointing. And so I think you know, as people have gone through the sense making, now we're at that place. Anything that shows a next step and one after that is so incredibly timely and important. And any of us who have had the inclination through this whole past few decades and building on the shoulders and actions of so many before us, but have had this inclination towards taking every little piece of wisdom or insight that we've ever had and seeing how we can make it come alive in our daily life. I think that it really is a time now to offer that, however that happens, because it could just be by living it ourselves and in a way shining the light in that way. Yeah, that's what's present for now.
It just reminds me, at the very beginning of COVID, I insisted that Bonnie have a call with a bunch of us, during which she ended up saying, upon my pushing, this is the time to act on your instincts. Like this was such a revealing, tiny little sentence that changed my life after, you know, afterwards. Like how I lived my daily life and the following actions that led all the way to moving to Costa Rica now actually took courage and took heart from that one sentence that I heard from a trusted, well trusted and loved source. Yeah, so insights, instincts, action, there are certain very simple, basic elements that are actually nameable, that I feel like you are already naming over and over, Bonnie. But I do have to go over your work and like, if I had to pick 5, which 5 or 4 or 3, you know, that, yeah, if they were all in one call, what would those be?
I mean, I think that the way I relate to some of it is that, of course, now I'm going to get cognitive, but someone unsubscribed from the pop-up school because she said she enjoyed the embodiment course, but it wasn't very embodied. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. So, what the way I relate to it is that, reflecting like you said, it could have been, when I said that to you, you could have had a different outcome if you were a different person. Who knows what the outcome would have been. But I think that, and this comes from Ria too. So I'm borrowing all these insights by weaving together things I've learned. But to me, when times are really complex, I mean, they're really complex, and you could look for all the evidence and counter evidence for any issue. I think one thing that works always improves the situation. At least you can learn from it. You're not going to get what you think you want. Is if you can act on one enduring truth. Like I remember Ria said to me at one point, I'm just doing this experiment. What if I only react by loving the other person? Okay, it's an enduring truth. We all believe that that creates virtuous cycles in the human condition. And just every decision you can't decide, well, I have this one coin I use for it, this one token I use, always in this direction, and this is where these things are simple, but they're powerful because they're based on enduring truths. And you can always find a preferable decision when you use one of those, one of those tokens. And like commitment to place, when I moved here, during all that craziness, I had established this, that I was going to be here, right? Like at its, even if it was at its minimal viable form, right? So what if just this one thing is non-negotiable? It creates like an attractor that builds some kind of coherence, So, so it could be place, it could be this principle that, and you do run it like an experiment, right? Because if it turns out to be not a good principle or not an enduring truth, you want to say, okay. But I would say that, and that's when I said, trust your instincts. There's something there that's just there. So you can't learn, it's like any experiment, you can't learn without making some part of your experimental method a base point, right? So yeah, that's when you guys were talking, I was remembering some of this stuff that, yeah.
I mean, I wonder if it's probably related to enduring truth, but when HA offered that instruction that you gave, that just changed her life, I think were the words that you used, right? I thought about the pith instructions of different traditions, and like in times when, for whatever reason, like the length of the teachings had to be, maybe it was illegal or unadvisable or dangerous to practice, or maybe there wasn't time or whatever it was, the ability to just like condense. And I think that was what I was sort of pointing to with the haikus also. It's like, I'm going to get as much meaning, and it's just occurring to me now, maybe this is partly a result of the embodiment of our interest in, and the feminine and the embodiment. And it's like, I feel like it's being orchestrated. Maybe we're collectively orchestrating this movement, but you can only really give, at least in my understanding, and this is something I hope to understand better, but in my experience, like when I give that kind of instruction, it's not a cognitive experience. It's like a full body transmission, or like it's completely coherent. The words and what I intend with the words, and wherever the source of the words is, like it's just coming straight through. And I feel like I've had some of those experiences recently. One was actually, it's happening a lot with healing. It's like the insights, and it could be a friend, could be in community, like I'm sure this happens a lot in your groups, but it's like someone says the thing that just lands like, ooh, it's like a splinter. For a week it's working on me, you know, and then finally insight. There's just seems to be some condensing of the potency of the teachings also. And maybe, I mean, I could make a bigger story about, you know, the urgency of the times or the complexity of the times, but maybe we are moving towards some kind of a portal. But I find that really exciting.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a lecture by Brian Swim? He has written that book with, what's the other guy, about the story of the universe. So, and he can really picture how the universe started from the Big Bang and these elements, and I mean, I find it incredible how he can really make the story come alive. And then there's somewhere in that evolution, there is too much oxygen around the earth, and life is like, oh, we can't deal with this oxygen, it's poisoning us. And then he mentioned how long it took. It was like millions of years or something. And then suddenly the cells will find a way to use oxygen, and that solves the whole thing. And that's part of creating life. And to me, it feels like we're in a similar moment, like, oh, we need to find something else and we don't know what it is yet. And it's like, ugh, like until somewhere it shifts into something, now we can use whatever the toxin was for our benefit or something. And to me, it seems like what I shared in my check-in, like when somebody's asked me, can I have a conversation with you because that it isn't this and that? And I'm like, why only with me? I'm not that important, even if I have written the book or whatever. And so I'm starting to propose to the people, who else would you like to have to be in that conversation? So there's something about moving away from very somehow linear, me and you, to in a way complexify it, like more people. But and then what comes out of it was like really amazing. It started with, let's say, question a tiny box, and at the end of the conversation it was like, whoa, like seeing a whole vision. So there's something that wants to come true. I think it's my, if you haven't watched Brian Swim, please do. It's really amazing, or I find it amazing.
Ria, I don't know if you mentioned it, but if you didn't, could you repeat it or let us know how long was that period before the cells figured out how to use oxygen? Do you remember?
I'm very bad at these details, but it was a very long time.
Well, hopefully that part is also speeding up.
In that case, we might be evolving into plastic utilizing machines capacities. We should have a lot of plastic around. And I did watch the story of the universe multiple times. I love it. Thanks for bringing it up. Yeah. And since I have the mic, I'll just re-mention this experimenting with the enduring truths. That very much resonates deeply, or even parallels on how I've been living my life. You know, for the last maybe 10, maybe even 15 years, more unconsciously, but more consciously in the last 10 years, always like picking certain, I call them teachings like sky, but they are also enduring truths like as within, so without, or accepting what is, like just being willing to see what is and accept it and see what happens. Like practicing such pieces, pearls of wisdom over a couple of years, minimum like 1, 2, 3 years, and seeing how life then organizes, my life reorganizes itself around it. It's the only way I know how to live, to be honest. And I want to bring back like that question of like, what keeps our culture from growing up? Is it the more conscious knowing or exposure to these pearls or enduring truths? Is there, or is it just not time yet? Like there's nothing for the culture to be growing into. It's just a matter of time. We will when we have to.
I remember we touched on this topic last time we spoke offline, and we were kind of circling around, and really this goes back to our understanding of human development and childhood development, is that ideally a child will grow when they're having a balance between what you could call the supportive factors, the nurturing, familiar, comforting factors, and then the stimulating, stretching, challenging ones. And when there's too much of the first, you can have stagnation and boredom and sort of a retracting. And if you have too much of the other, you can have overwhelm and stress and anxiety and panic and shutdown and trauma. And of course, the mix of those two depends both on the age and stage of a human being, but also on their personality and how they're neurologically wired and what they're up for and what not, right? Some of us have a much higher threshold for adventure and unknown than others. Some of us have a much bigger need for the known. So to me, that's a bit the question of the time too, is, you know, tying it back into what we're talking about today, is the acceleration and the intensification that many of us are feeling, not obviously just us on our call. I'd say this is much more a global phenomenon as far as I can tell. Is it hitting the too much, where there's a shutting down and a retracting and a lowering of consciousness? Is it, I don't think at this point we could say there's not enough challenge. I think there's plenty. I mean, some of us are still largely cushioned from it, or have our heads in the sand and are not paying attention to it. And so then we might not be feeling it, but it's just a matter of time. But so for me, the question though is can we navigate this time in a way so that we can actually use the intensification and the acceleration to do exactly what those cells so brilliantly did, Ria? You know, I want to go back and watch that with my daughter, because it is such a beautiful story of awe and hope. I remember watching it in my 20s or 30s, and I think that's exactly what she needs right now. And then this whole thing about the cells is incredible. Mind you, she has also asked me just last night, will we make it through? Are we going to be okay? Are humans still good? And I said yes to all of those. But then when she says, how long will it take? I said, I don't know. And so that's why my timeline question is kind of key, because I've got a daughter who's 18. And anyways, back to what I was saying is, how can we navigate it so it doesn't tip into the too much where we actually fall backwards? And maybe these enduring truths, I also find, you know, they in a way are like keys to make that work. And one thing I've noticed is a lot of things get said very quickly in the cognitive space, like we need to hold multiple perspectives. You know, that's one that I've been really tracking as far as how many people can actually do it, not just think it. How many people can live it both at the emotional level of their being and the somatic level of their being? So it's a whole person thing that you're actually holding more than your own perspective at any one time, and that you can become agile. And the more I look at it, the more I realize it's something that a lot of people can talk about. It's actually something that not that many people can do. And so it's interesting what you were saying at the very beginning, Bonnie, is how people are actually reaching for these more simple, to me, they're simple, but they've got this generator function kind of feel to them. They're basic, not basic as in, they're basic more as in foundational. And I've noticed that I've been drawn to, and I'm putting together a course, which probably take a while until it's complete because life is so incredibly full. But what I've been drawn to is actually how is it possible to impart and to teach people in learning those basic things that they can talk about easily and that are talked about all over the place, but not that often lived and breathed and embodied. And I think the more we can do that, I do see a better passage through.
Yeah, so I think in the process of just weaving around to this other question about these shifting, we've honed in on some of answering this question about not growing up. So yeah, so multiple perspectives. We'd like to think the world has changed a lot, but my experience, even from people who are otherwise very successful in society, that very few people have more than one perspective. Almost everybody references what is back to their self. They make meaning. Is it good for me or bad for me? This is 99.9% of 99.9% of people's experience. It's just the truth. That's a single person perspective. It may get hyper complexified through cognitive linguistics, but the fundamental perspective is in reference to me. So self-referential meaning making. That's the big switch I see between Ria's first and second circle, for example. So when you switch to the second circle, there's certainly still a self-referential, but the self is so expanded that it's different than the one that I just talked about. So I think that's frankly kind of bullshit, that the way we're going to survive is people going to be multi-perspectival, or even should be. Zach Stein said something in an interview that I was listening to him where he was making kind of this comment, and he says that what we need are more reality dependent challenges for children. So there's a lot of challenges and they get overwhelmed, but everything is sliding. Like, this person doesn't like you, so you just block them. The teacher thinks you're bad, so you just think she doesn't know they're, and so he said, we need to have more reality dependent challenges for people. And this is somehow associated with our enduring, an experiment with an enduring truth is an experiment with something that reality is going to comment on. And I think that answers why I see this cultural problem. Like, some people, students that I teach from Latin America don't seem to have, seem to grow up faster, have more grounding. And the more abstract our cultural systems are, the more our money is abstract, the more our politics is abstract, and the more our media is abstract, the longer it will prolong. No, people won't grow up because one of the parts of growing up is to have an accurate map of self, other, and world, and you need reality dependent challenges for that. So I would say that's something Montessori knew, for example. The other part about reality dependent challenges, it doesn't shame you in the same way that cultural challenges do. If you tried to kick the tree and it didn't break, it's a certain kind of experience. But if you tried to make someone like you and they told you to, get out of town, it's a different type of experience. And so there's something about the neutrality of reality, that it doesn't really care about you, but it doesn't shame you either. And so that I think is a big piece of it. And somehow it ties into grounded experience and enduring truths. Yeah.
I wonder if this is related. Small anecdote. Yesterday, I went to the Sheep and Wool Festival here in Rhinebeck. It's an annual festival and it's a big deal. And I've been hearing about it for a couple of years because they didn't have it last year because of COVID. And so we went and there were thousands of people there. Like it was a huge, huge event as we drove in. I could not believe the cars. It was like crazy and packed to see these sheep and to buy yarn and to like sheep and wool. Like that was literally all it was. And I walked through, we enjoyed the animals for a while, and then we walked through the vendors booths, and Eleanor was pointing, there were these beautiful sweaters, and she was like, oh, like that's the sweater I've been wanting, Mom, that's the one. And so I went over and I'm like, okay, so I'm looking at the signs. I'm like I couldn't understand the language of the signs. And then I realized it was for the patterns to make the sweaters. They were not selling the sweaters. And my consumerism was like, has never been so clear to me. Like I was just looking for the sweaters. Like there are all these people here ready to buy sweaters and nobody was selling the sweaters. So you could buy buttons and you could buy the yarn and you could buy the patterns, but you could not buy a sweater. And I was extremely disoriented by this experience. But no one else seemed disoriented. So I think there is hope. I haven't felt like such a city slicker in a long time. Oh, yay. Yeah, it's great. It's great. And also I will say Eleanor is learning to knit now at school. The school she's going to has taught them to knit. And when she told me this, I thought she'll never be able to do this because I can't knit, never could do it. And she came home and she brought this precious little, being, like felt being with a cape that she had knit, the cape. And I could not believe my eyes. It was so exciting and extraordinary to me that she could knit. And it was like, oh yeah, to her, it was like, yeah, like no big deal. So I think there's hope.
We learned to knit in school when we were 7. Everybody had to. That was how it was. Everybody could knit. Everyone. Not everybody liked it. It's part of growing up,
Where I grew up, all the boys, all the girls, all learned how to knit. It was just one of the pieces of the curriculum.
I think it's coming back. That's the thing. I really do. I think it's coming back.
There's something about that engaging with life that gives you immediate feedback. The word that was coming up as I was listening to your beautiful story there, and then seeing you hold up these things you've knitted, Ria, is competence. It's almost a different part of education is competence. It's like something, and I see it in the, I know I've spoken about this before, my daughter doing 2 different outdoor programs and seeing the kids go through this. And there's a competence that is gained that is, it's not compartmentalized into an intellectual or a physical or an emotion. It's the whole thing, their whole being. I remember they came out of a week up in the mountains and it was minus 27 degrees centigrade. This is very, very cold. And they camped in tents, and then they also created snow caves that they would alternate nights. So they spent a night in a tent and then they huddled up in a snow cave and they took turns, and they literally were sleeping with peanut butter and in their sleeping bags, otherwise there's no way they could spread it the next morning. And they slept with their water bottles in their sleeping bags, otherwise it was ice. I mean, it was really something. And I will never forget, they're coming down from the mountains, and all the parents are waiting there eagerly to see that their kids are still alive. And the look on their faces, I still see it. I can't find words to describe it, but it was this mix of absolute relief, absolute glee, like joy, exhaustion, energized. And if I would try and put it in one word, they looked initiated. They literally looked like they had gone through something and come out, and it was one of the best, I've spoken to all of them since, it's one of the best experiences they've ever had. They will never forget it. And they gained so much competence, not just physically, like the stories that they've told about the give and take, the emotional competence, the empathy they had, the generosity they had to evoke for one another, the patience, dealing with the cultural aspects. Like their teacher was really good at saying, you have to check your moods, because one of you can bring down the whole group. So you actually have to be quite disciplined about containing. You can go off and rant on your own or with a friend, but when you're in the collective, you need to bring your best self forwards. And so there's something about competence. It's almost like once you have it, you have it. You know, it's like having learned how to ride a bicycle. It's like something you can rely on that then you can keep growing upon with more competence. So I just completely agree with everything you guys have said about that. I think it's lacking in many places, and it's so important to bring in more, as much as we can.
It is that reality, huh? of yeah, you can bring each other down, and just like yesterday, I looked at my knitting, this one, and I had to take out like that piece because I made a mistake in the pattern. And it's that reality, you know, either you leave it and then I will look at it all the time there is a mistake, or I take it out and I just knit it again. Yeah, it's maybe 1 or 2 evenings work, something, but that kind of a reality where that's what Bonnie was talking about. Like this, either you take it out and you do it again, or you look at it your whole life. It's and I think in the West, we're that kind of, oh, does it make me better or does it not? That the collective reality has gone. Like I grew up in a village, and there was always the neighbors and the people from the soccer club and the people from, I mean, you could not live such an isolated life as you can do now. So there was more reality checks, and you had to kind of, if you want to be, let's say, maybe honorable is too strong a word, but like want to be part of the collective of the village, you had to grow up. Otherwise people would, I don't know what they would do, but you would be down on the ladder. And I think that collective force of bringing one another up in that way, I think it's not around as I see it these days in villages or cities or anything. So yeah, I think we need to check out, ladies.
I was just wondering if we could, just as a closing, just each of us mention what we're taking away from this, like sort of just that little piece that has landed for us, if anything. Maybe I'll start. I think for me, the piece that feels most alive right now is actually in a way the both end of the very much the reality check, the competency in the showing up daily life, do the next right thing, but with the complexity impregnating it, rather than we need to leave that behind and now just go to simple stuff. Like, I actually think there's something about those two together that I think really offers a fullness for moving forwards, at least in my sense making right now.
That deserves a whole conversation, what you just said. What I take away also is a whole other conversation that we didn't even mention, but character building came up a lot. And character building, there's a book called Thrivers. I don't know if any of you heard. It's a new book, scientifically researched principles that are present, or qualities that are present in severely traumatized children who made it, who grew up to be just fine, versus the ones who couldn't. And competence is one. I think it's in there. That coupled with real life feedback, even at the body movement level, really, really early in life. Actually it starts at conception, but the first 3 years of life with movement. And then like I end up watching movies with my son. He's 6 years old, and I never pause the movie. Sometimes I lower the sound so his nervous system can regulate better. And then I'm always training him to breathe when he's not breathing, because these movies are intense. But that level of education, it's not necessarily educating children, over-educating them in any way, or like creating ninjas out of them, but like basic education of well-being, which is missing in the parents to begin with. So yeah, I'm left with that question of like, whatever is going on, this is the material we have. These are the people we have. I do agree with Barney that multiple perspective taking capacity is not just going to appear and we're going to have like a higher consciousness humanity on earth that shifts everything all of a sudden. And I'm curious about, I know that's not going to happen. I'm curious about what will happen, because I know life finds a way to move forward. So I'm very curious about that. I'm left with that question. What collective intelligence, what intelligence will come through us as human collective to allow us to find the next version of our life on Earth?
Yeah, and I'll check out with a kind of synthesis. I want to say that it's not that human consciousness is not at a stage where multiple perspectives is not possible. What I want to say is, when you have reality dependent challenges, you get an it perspective and you see that the reality is systems. When you live in a village, like Ria was saying, and you have grandmothers and grandparents, and you get a we perspective, and then you have your I perspective. What I'm saying is that they're tied together, that the reason it's not because we're not advancing, we're devolving in the West. So I would say that's how it ties up for me.
I guess that leaves me. I'll finish with a haiku. The simple is now overtaking our complex. Oh, hallelujah. Not one of my best on the spot, but yeah, I'm just left with the distillation, like this incredible, the power of the distillation. And maybe noteworthy that we also distilled our time here at High Pitch to 1 hour constraint. So beautiful. Thank you. Lovely.
Thanks, it was great.